They say the Appalachian Mountains are beautiful until night falls. Then they become something else entirely, older, quieter, and alive in ways no map can explain. Tonight, we're venturing deep into those forgotten hollows, where campfires don't always keep the dark out, and some trails lead to places not meant to be found. These are 10 true stories of hikers and campers who came face to face with the unexplainable, and some of them were never the same. If you love true horror stories, tap that like button. It helps this video reach more horror fans like you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Every viewer is part of my horror family, and I want to know where my family's tuning in from tonight. And don't forget to subscribe. Your support keeps Creepy Souls alive and bringing you more terrifying stories every single week. Now let's begin. I shouldn't have been out there alone, but I needed the distance. Last fall, I'd quit my job in Charleston, boxed up everything I owned, and headed west toward the mountains. I wasn't trying to find myself or anything dramatic like that. I just wanted quiet, the kind that hums beneath the trees and creeps through the fog before sunrise. Devil's Ledge isn't on any modern trail map. I found it in a faded hiker's blog from 2007. Said it sat about 10 miles past the marked switchbacks near Sandlick Hollow. The guy who wrote it said the view at sunrise felt like you were the last person alive. That was the selling point. I parked where the gravel turned to washed-out earth, shouldered my gear, and followed the old logging road through brush and shadow. It was early October. Leaves slick underfoot. The air wet and metallic with the smell of rot. The kind of chill that sinks in behind your ribs and just stays. It took most of the afternoon to find it. The ledge jutted out over a steep drop, forest rolling like waves beneath endless ridgelines stacked behind mist. The wind came from below, constant, soft. I pitched my tent near a crooked pine, boiled some instant noodles, and watched dusk melt the sky into rust and bruise. That night, it got cold fast. I was half asleep, cocooned in my bag, when I heard it. A whistle, soft, low, one drawn-out note, then a pause. No rhythm, no melody, just a long, tuneless sound like someone whistling without caring how it came out. I froze. It came from the left side of the tent, maybe 30 feet off. Another whistle, same tone, now behind me. Then again, closer to the front this time, near where I'd hung my food bag. It never got closer, never retreated. It just moved, circling, stopping whenever I sat up or reached for the zipper. And the worst part, it didn't sound curious. It didn't sound playful or threatening. It sounded tired, aimless, like someone pacing in the dark, keeping themselves company. I stayed up the rest of the night, didn't open the tent, didn't speak, just listened. By dawn it was gone. I packed up without eating, retraced my path down the slope, and didn't stop until I hit pavement. I told myself it was just some mountain guy, or maybe a hermit. Maybe he didn't even know I was there. Maybe I imagined it, but I never told anyone. Nearly a year passed. I never went back to Devil's Ledge, never even thought about it much, at least, not in ways I could hold on to. But sometimes, lying in bed with the fan on, I'd hear a single note under the hum, tuneless, thin. I'd tell myself it was the wind. A dream. Something between sleep and waking. This September, I passed through Norton, West Virginia. I was driving to visit my sister in Elkins, and the tank was low. Pulled off at this old gas station near a bend in the road. One of those places with a sagging awning and a red Coke machine that looked like it hadn't been filled since the Clinton years. Inside, a man leaned behind the counter, chewing on a toothpick, wearing a dirty denim vest over a thermal. 60s, maybe older. He nodded when I walked in but didn't say anything. I grabbed some peanuts, a coffee. As he rang me up, he squinted a little. "You hike?" I hesitated. "Sometimes." He pointed at my boots, still muddy from a detour through brushy ridge. "Figured." I nodded, already turning toward the door, but then he said, "You heard the whistler too, huh?" I stopped. I didn't say anything. He didn't ask a question again, just looked at me with this strange, dry calm. like he already knew my answer. I forced a little laugh. "What do you mean?" He shrugged. "They always hear it first time on the ledge. Circles you. Don't come close. You move. It stops. Sound about right." My throat felt tight. My hands were suddenly cold. I didn't answer. He nodded to himself like that confirmed something. "It's old. I reckon older than the trails." I tried to push the words out. "You saying it's a person?" He tilted his head like he hadn't thought of it that way. "Nah," he said finally. "I don't think so, but it's not gone either." I left the peanuts on the counter and walked out without the coffee. The sound of the door chime stuck in my ears longer than it should have. I didn't stop again until I was halfway to Elkins, pulled over at a rest area, and just sat in the car for 20 minutes. That night, I didn't sleep much. I kept thinking about why it bothered me so much. Not the whistling, not the thing itself, but the fact that I hadn't told anyone. Not my sister. Not my friends. Not even in passing. And yet this stranger in Norton had spoken about it like he'd seen it on me. Like it leaves something behind. And I've wondered about that since. What I brought back down from that ledge. Because every now and then, just before sleep, I get this image in my head. Not of a man. Not even a figure. Just the shape of someone standing a few yards off in the trees. Still. Waiting. And then the whistle starts. And I always know exactly where it's coming from. Right outside my window. But when I look, there's nothing there. Just the wind moving the trees. Just the night air shifting. And silence, holding its breath. It was late October when I headed up toward Grandfather Mountain for a solo weekend. I'd been running myself into the ground at work, fighting to keep a failing relationship alive, and just needed to get out. Clear my head. Breathe some cold, piney air that didn't smell like cigarettes and arguments. The trail I picked wasn't on most of the new maps. I found it on an old forum thread. A user named Ridgeline74 talking about backcountry loops near Boone that had been closed after a storm in the 90s, but were still passable, if you knew where to cut in. Perfect. I left my truck just before noon, at a turnout that barely looked legal. No signs, just a rusted gate with one hinge. The air smelled like wet bark and the sharp must of decaying leaves. A low fog clung to the valley below, and the trees were mostly bare, branches like gray veins scratching the sky. I hiked for a few hours, no destination, just following the ridge until it felt right. Somewhere between the overgrown switchbacks and an old stone footbridge, I found the clearing. It wasn't marked. No signs. No trail split. Just a slope off to the right where the trees thinned and a level patch of ground opened up like it had been waiting. In the center of that patch was a fire pit, cold, scattered with old stones and half-burnt wood. Around it, 3 large stumps looked like they'd been used as seats. There was something about it, the placement, the shape, that didn't feel accidental. I dropped my pack. It was getting toward late afternoon, and the wind had a bite to it. Felt like a good place to stop. I set up my tent a little ways back and cooked dinner over my jet boil. Dehydrated chili. Pretty terrible stuff. I ate it anyway. I was about to tuck in for the night when I saw him. A kid, maybe 16, 17, sitting on one of the stumps across the fire pit. Just sitting. Quiet. Still. I must have jumped a foot. I didn't hear him come up. No footsteps. No crackling leaves. He wore an old red hoodie with the sleeves pushed up. His jeans were torn at the knees, and his sneakers looked soaked. His face was pale. Not sick, but like he'd been out in the cold too long. Sandy hair. Thin build. He didn't look scared or dangerous. Just tired. "Jesus, kid, you scared the hell out of me," I said, trying to sound less startled than I was. He didn't respond right away. Just stared at the coals that weren't even burning. "You okay?" I asked. He nodded slowly, waiting for my brother. I glanced around. "Out here?" He went to get help. I stayed here in case he came back. There was something off in the way he said it. Not panicked. Not hopeful. Just rehearsed. "You been out here long?" I asked. He shrugged. "Since yesterday." "Got food or anything?" He shook his head, still not looking at me. I opened my pack and handed him a granola bar and one of my spare waters. He took them without a word and ate slowly, like someone trying to make it last. The sun was nearly down. The sky turned that dusty purple you only get in the mountains. I lit my lantern and offered to make a little fire, but he said, "It's fine." We sat in quiet for maybe 20 minutes. I asked where he was from. He said, "Not far." I asked his name. He said, "Matt." No last name. I offered to hike down with him in the morning, said we could get help or find a ranger station. He nodded, but didn't say anything else. It got colder. My breath fogged in front of me. I told him I was turning in and that he could crash by the fire if he wanted. He just nodded again. I zipped into my tent, unsure what else to do. The kid didn't seem scared or hurt, just waiting, and I figured in the morning we'd get it sorted. The next morning, I unzipped my tent and looked out toward the fire pit. Empty. No mat, no granola wrapper, no water bottle, no footprints, no drag marks, nothing, just the stones, cold and undisturbed. I checked around the clearing, even in the brush, called out a few times, nothing. The ground was soft from last night's dew, but there were no fresh tracks, not even mine, oddly, like the earth had pressed flat. I felt stupid, but also uneasy in a way I couldn't explain, like I'd dreamed it, maybe, but the memory was sharp, too clear. I packed up and made my way down, took the same trail back, every turn familiar, but still, I moved faster than before. When I reached the truck, I checked my phone, no signal. I drove into Boone and stopped at a ranger station near the trailhead, just off Highway 221. There was an older guy at the desk, named Patch Red Harlan. Looked like he'd seen 1,000 seasons roll through these hills. I told him what happened. He listened quietly, never interrupting, just nodded slightly, hands clasped in front of him. When I finished, he leaned back and let out a long breath through his nose. "You said he told you his name was Matt?" he asked. "Yeah, and said he was waiting for his brother." I nodded. Harlan got up and walked into a back room. Came back a minute later holding a manila folder. He opened it and pulled out a photocopied sheet, handed it to me. It was an old missing person report, grainy photo of a kid, red hoodie, slight build, same face. Matthew Clay, 17.
Right.
Disappeared. October 25, 1992. Vanished on a solo hike. Harlan said, "Brother went looking, never came back either. No trace. Just an abandoned campfire and a busted compass." I felt my stomach drop. This has to be a mistake," I said, handing the paper back. He didn't argue, just looked at me and said, "You're not the first person to see him, and you probably won't be the last." I left the station with this weird weight on my chest, like something had shifted but I couldn't name what. I've gone camping since, different places, safer ones. But every time I'm sitting alone by a fire, and the light starts to fade, I wonder,
If I turn around,
will he be there again, waiting? Still, I couldn't stop thinking about that fight. Back home in Charlotte, I tried to let it fade, got back into work, rejoined the swirl of traffic and deadlines and grocery store small talk. But that trip stayed stuck in my brain like a splinter under the nail, just deep enough that you can't quite forget it's there. The weird thing was, I didn't feel scared of Matt, not exactly. I felt unsettled, like something had brushed too close to me that night, close enough to change something. And even now, weeks later, I kept waking up at 3 a.m. for no reason. No nightmares, no sounds, just alert, cold, wide awake. It all could have ended there, a strange encounter I'd never be able to explain. But 2 months later, I got a message from an old college buddy, Travis, who I hadn't talked to in years. He'd seen one of my hiking posts online. I'd left a vague caption about a strange night in Boone, and said he was planning a winter trip up that way. I didn't mention the fire pit. I just told him to be careful, especially off trail. That's when he said something that stopped me cold. "Funny, my cousin said they saw a kid up there last year, sitting by a fire pit, looked half frozen, wouldn't talk much, said he was waiting for his brother." I called Travis immediately. I needed details. His cousin Rachel had been hiking with a friend up near the same ridgeline in early December of the previous year. She described the same red hoodie, same cold stare, same words, waiting for my brother. I asked what happened next. She said she turned around to get something out of her pack. Travis told me. When she looked back, he was gone. My mouth went dry. Did she tell anyone? Just family. She figured it was maybe a runaway or something. But when I told her your post mentioned Boone, she went pale. I got Rachel's number and called her the next day. She confirmed it all, almost word for word what I'd experienced. There was something heavy about him, she said, like he wasn't just cold, like he belonged to the cold. That line stuck with me. After the call, I went into full obsession mode, started digging through old hiking blogs, forum posts, subreddits. I looked up missing persons cases from the 90s near Boone, checked newspaper archives, scanned hiking Facebook groups for rumors or similar stories. I found three more reports, all anonymous or buried in comments, of people seeing a pale teenager alone near old campfire pits in that part of the mountains, always in late fall or early winter, always saying he was waiting for his brother. No one ever saw him leave. No one ever found any tracks. That's when I knew I had to go back. I'm not proud of that decision. I knew it was reckless, but something about that night had taken root in me, and if I didn't face it, I'd be looking over my shoulder the rest of my life. So, I went. Late January. Cold enough that most of the trails were empty. I told friends I was heading to Asheville for the weekend. I didn't mention my real plans. Not even to Travis. I parked at the same turnout. Snow flurried lightly as I hiked in. Not enough to bury the trail, but enough to hush everything else. Every branch was dusted white. The air smelled like pine bark and frozen moss. I reached the clearing just after 3 in the afternoon. The fire pit was still there, exactly the same. I stood for a while watching my breath drift. Then I sat down on the same stump where I'd seen him, waited. An hour passed, then 2. As the light started to bleed out of the sky, I lit a small fire and opened a pack of jerky. The crackling of the flames was the only sound. No birds, no wind, just silence pressing in like a hand. And then, I felt it, a shift. I turned, slowly. He was standing at the edge of the clearing, where the trees started. Same hoodie, same jeans, same pale skin. But this time, he looked right at me. Not through me, not past me, at me. Matt, I said. He walked forward, silent, stopped across from me at the fire. I came back, I said, barely recognizing my own voice. I wanted to know what happened to you. He didn't speak, but his eyes were different this time. Not empty, sad, lost, like something in him had worn thin and was about to break. I read the reports, I said, about you and your brother. You disappeared in '92. People still talk about it. He blinked slowly, then whispered, he never came back. The words hit me like a body blow. I wanted to ask more, where he'd been, what he meant, but before I could speak again, he stepped closer to the fire, and for the first time, I saw something that made my blood turn to ice. He wasn't standing on the ground. His feet were half a foot above it, like he was caught mid-step, just barely lifted, like fog over water. I stood up, heart hammering, and he looked up at me. I waited, he said softly. I waited, and waited. He didn't come back. My mouth went dry. Your brother, he was looking for help, right? He nodded. I said the only thing I could think of. Maybe he's still out there. Maybe he's waiting for you now. Matt blinked, and then something changed. His body flickered, not like a ghost or a movie effect, but like a dying flashlight, in and out, just for a second. Then he was gone. No noise, no shimmer, just gone. And the fire snuffed out instantly. I stood in darkness, heart thudding in my ears. I didn't sleep, just sat there until the gray light of dawn crept over the ridge. I hiked out that morning in a daze. I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said. He never came back. But later, in town, I went to the library archives. I pulled the microfilm,
Found the original article. 2 brothers vanish on hike near Boone. Only trace found cold fire pit and broken compass. But then, at the bottom of the article, one line I'd missed before. A second body, believed to be Matthew Clay, was recovered 5 months later near a ravine. No sign of the older brother. I'd gotten it backward. Matt hadn't been the one waiting. He was the one who never made it home. Afterward, that trip changed something in me. I don't talk about it much. Most people wouldn't believe me. But every fall around the same week, I leave something by a campfire in the woods. A granola bar, a bottle of water, a flashlight, and walk away without looking back. And sometimes, when the fog rolls in just right, I think I hear a voice behind me. Faint, fragile. I waited, and I still don't know if I was meant to see him, or if I was just the first one to come back.
I've camped solo all over the Appalachian Range, North Georgia, up through Pennsylvania. But there's something about West Virginia that always draws me back. The silence here is heavier. The woods denser, like the land remembers things it shouldn't. This trip I'd driven up a crumbling logging road that spiderwebbed off Route 32, just east of Spruce Knob. The map said it hadn't been maintained in years, and based on the potholes, I believed it. I parked where the road narrowed into brush, slung my gear over my shoulder, and hiked in about a mile until I found a flat stretch tucked between laurel thickets. No cell service, no distant highway noise, just me and the forest. It was mid-fall. The ground was soft with layers of wet leaves, that sweet, earthy decay that clings to your boots and seeps into your sleeping bag if you let it. I pitched camp near an old fire ring, clearly used years ago, but now overgrown with moss and the brittle ribs of past branches. The first odd thing I noticed was the stump. It sat maybe 30 yards out from camp, on the edge of a small clearing. At first glance, it wasn't anything special. A clean cut, maybe waist high, flat across the top like it had been sheared by a chainsaw not long ago. But as I got closer, I saw the liquid. It oozed slow from the center, thick and dark. Not amber like sap, but darker, almost burgundy. It pooled in a groove on the cut surface, then slid down the side like sweat. When I leaned in to smell it, the stench hit me hard. Metallic, sour, like rusted meat. I stepped back, suddenly nauseous. It wasn't tree sap. I don't know what it was, but I wasn't about to poke it. I took a photo with my phone, marked the stump with a strip of neon orange trail tape from my pack, mostly out of curiosity. Maybe I'd show a ranger on the way out. Maybe there was some plant disease that caused that, or an animal marking territory. I hiked for a few hours that afternoon. A light mist hung in the hollows, softening the ridge lines and coating the ferns in droplets. I didn't see another soul. Just old deer scat, bear claw marks on a downed log, and silence that grew heavier. The deeper I went, when I got back near dusk, something felt different. The air was still, too still. I walked the same path back to where I'd left the marked stump. Only now, there was no stump, just raw earth, not torn up, not disturbed in that chaotic way storms do. This was clean, fresh soil, damp and dark, shaped almost like a shallow bowl, and dragging out from it, 2 long parallel indentations, like grooves made by something heavy being pulled through wet leaves. They led straight into the tree line. I stood there, not breathing, for longer than I'd admit. My first thought wasn't even fear, it was confusion. I looked around, made sure I wasn't turned around. I checked the GPS ping on my offline map. I was exactly where I'd marked it. No stump, no tape, just that smell still lingering in the air. I backed off and returned to camp without unpacking. That night, I barely slept. At sunrise, I made coffee just to keep my hands from shaking. The night hadn't been loud. No footsteps, no snapping branches, but something about the woods felt changed, like it had shifted in its sleep and was waiting for me to notice. I left camp with my camera and followed the drag marks again. They extended farther than I thought, weaving through a dense patch of hemlock,
and into a hollow thick with wet fern and slick black stones. The grooves deepened in spots, like whatever was pulled had caught or resisted. I kept walking. Eventually the marks stopped near a thicket of saplings. Beyond them, I found something I still can't explain. A depression in the earth, maybe 10 feet wide, like a collapsed sinkhole or a shallow grave. No rockfall, no roots exposed, just soft earth shaped like something had laid there for a long time. On impulse, I stepped into it. The air dropped 5 degrees. It was silent, so silent I could hear my blood in my ears. No birds, no insects, just breath. I turned slowly. A piece of orange plastic fluttered in the brush. My trail tape. It was tied to a branch 20 feet away, no longer near a stump, just dangling like it had been placed there to mislead. Something creaked behind me, soft, like shifting weight on a wood floor. I spun, heart hammering, but there was nothing. Just trees, empty trees, and that smell again, faint now, but wrong. I left, didn't stop moving until I reached my truck. Even days later, back home, the smell lingered on my pack. I washed it twice before tossing it in the dumpster. My boots too, something about them felt off, not cursed, just like they didn't belong to me anymore. Weeks later, I pulled the photo from my phone, the one I'd taken of the stump. Only now, the photo looked different. Same clearing, same cut wood, but no dark liquid, no trail tape, no sign I'd ever touched it. Just a regular stump, dry, dusty even. I checked the timestamp. It was correct, but the image didn't match what I remembered, not at all. I tried to let it go, told myself maybe I exaggerated it in my mind. Maybe I misremembered. Memory can warp under stress, but I know what I saw. And sometimes now, when I'm hiking alone, I still catch that smell, faint, like rusted blood in standing water, and I'll see a stump where there wasn't one before. Clean cut, too fresh, always wet, and I don't go near it, because whatever moves through those woods, it doesn't want to be seen, and when it is, it moves.
Elkhorn Lake sits deep in a fold of the Appalachian Mountains, quiet and half forgotten. It's the kind of place where fog moves slower than time, where the air smells of rain-soaked leaves and cold iron. My friends and I, Evan, Luke, and Connor, drove out there one Friday night in early October, thinking we'd get away from everything. No phones, no light pollution, no noise. Just a weekend of fishing, whiskey, and silence. By the time we parked the truck near the tree line, it was close to midnight. The trail to the lake was muddy, narrow, swallowed by dark pines on both sides. Our boots sank with every step. When we finally reached the clearing, we set up near a half-collapsed picnic shelter and got a small fire going. The lake beyond it was flat and black, reflecting nothing but the thin light of our flames. We didn't talk much that night. The quiet out there had a way of pressing on you, like the woods didn't want to be disturbed. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the occasional slap of water against the bank. That's when my radio came on. It was a small, old, portable one. Cheap thing I always kept in my pack for weather reports. The dial hadn't been turned in days. Yet, without anyone touching it, the speaker crackled to life with sharp static. I thought maybe moisture got into the battery contacts. But then, under the hiss, came a faint pattern, like someone trying to tune in. Connor laughed, thinking I was messing with them. But then a voice came through. Not loud, not clear. Just a slow, dragging whisper buried under the static. At first it was impossible to make out. Then, after a pause that felt too long, it said my full name. Not Mike, not Mike, my full name. The sound was thin, broken by static, but there was no mistaking it. I remember how the syllables felt wrong, as if someone unfamiliar with language was sounding them out for the first time. Then came a set of numbers, coordinates, spoken once, then again, then silence. No one spoke for a long time after that. Luke threw a stick into the fire, pretending to laugh it off. Connor said it had to be some ranger frequency or a random signal bouncing off the lake, but the tone in his voice said he didn't believe it either. I turned the radio off and stuffed it back in my bag. The woods were dead quiet again. No wind, no insects, no frogs, just the fire popping and the faint smell of burnt pine. We didn't finish the bottle. We didn't tell any more stories. We just let the fire die and sat in the dark until one by one we turned in. When I woke up a few hours later, the fog had rolled in thick. It pressed against the tent walls and muffled every sound. I thought I heard footsteps outside, slow, deliberate, but when I unzipped the flap, there was nothing, just the fire pit and the lake behind it, covered in mist like milk. The next morning, we packed early. No one mentioned the voice, not once. The whole drive back to Elkhorn Springs was silent, except for the sound of the tires slapping through puddles. I should have let it go. I really should have. But 2 days later, I found myself sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop open, typing the coordinates into Google Maps. It zoomed in on a spot about 10 miles northeast of Elkhorn Lake, an unmarked area off a service road deep in the forest. When I searched the location online, something came up, a missing camper from 1987. A man named Daniel R. Hensley vanished during a solo trip, last seen heading toward the same stretch of woods. No trace ever found. That night, I dreamed of water dripping in the dark, and a man whispering numbers under his breath. I woke up sweating. The radio on my nightstand turned on again, hissing quietly, even though the batteries were still out. I went back the following weekend, alone this time. It wasn't courage that brought me, more like a gnawing itch I couldn't ignore. The coordinates circled my mind, like a tune you can't stop humming. I needed to see what was there, even if I couldn't explain why. The trail out was worse than before. Rain had turned the soil to black mud, and the air was thick with the smell of wet moss and rot. My flashlight beam looked weak against the fog, swallowed almost instantly. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of old rusted trail signs half buried in leaves, pointing nowhere. After an hour of hiking, the GPS said I was close. The forest thinned just enough to reveal a shallow hollow, choked with dead branches and ferns. At its center was the remains of a campfire, just a ring of stones and a few scraps of charred metal, a melted canteen, a rusted belt buckle, nothing else. But there was something else buried halfway in the dirt near the Fonderenners. An old weather radio, identical to mine. The casing was cracked, half fused from what looked like heat damage. I turned it over in my hands, brushing away soil and moss. On the back, scratched faintly into the plastic, was a name. D. Hensley. I don't remember sitting down, but when I came to, I was on the ground, listening. The woods were dead silent, except for the faint sound of dripping water somewhere in the hollow. And then, just like before, the radio in my bag clicked on by itself. Static, then faint breathing. Not words this time, just someone exhaling, close to the microphone. I turned it off, but the noise didn't stop. I pulled the batteries out, still there. The sound wasn't coming from the radio, it was behind me. When I turned, there was no one there, just the tree line, the fog, and something faintly moving in the water, pooling at the bottom of the hollow. I told myself it was runoff, a trick of light, but my reflection wasn't where it should have been. It was off to the side, a half step delayed, as if something beneath the water was trying to mimic me. I don't remember running back, just the noise of my boots slamming mud, and the pounding in my ears. By the time I reached my truck, it was nearly dark. I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel, trying to steady my breathing. When I looked in the rearview mirror, I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the tree line, just a shape, tall still, staring. I blinked, and it was gone. I didn't tell my friends, I didn't tell anyone. But a few nights later, I found an envelope slid under my apartment door. No name, no return address. Inside was a mimic, hand-drawn, folded in hammock, and a short note scrawled in pencil, "You shouldn't have gone there." The mimic showed the same coordinates, but this time, they were crossed out. That was 3 years ago. I moved since then, changed numbers, changed jobs, stopped hiking altogether. But sometimes, late at night, I still hear the faint crack of static coming from somewhere in my apartment. When I check, the radio is off,
always off. And yet, every time the sound fades, I can almost make out a whisper under the noise. It says my name, and then it waits, like it's expecting me to answer.
I've hiked alone for years, mostly along the southern stretches of the Appalachians. After 10 years in EMS, I needed distance, solitude, somewhere quiet enough that nothing followed me in, not the calls, not the noise, not the guilt, just trees, cold air, and silence. That fall, I decided to try a remote loop deep in McDowell County. A guy I met in a gear shop mentioned a half-forgotten trail that wound past an old civilian conservation corps shelter. Way off-grid, he said. Quiet as the grave. That's exactly what I was looking for. The hike in was steep. The kind of steep that makes you second-guess your life choices. It had rained the day before, so every rock and root was slick. The forest felt heavy with moisture. The leaves were mostly down, sticking to everything. I followed the trail markers until they disappeared and switched to gut instinct after that. Uphill, then down. Then a split-off and overgrown fire road that dropped into a hollow like a mouth. The shelter sat at the bottom of that drop. 3 log walls, a rusted tin roof, a sagging picnic table out front. It looked like no one had touched it in years. Except someone had. A tarp was strung across the front corner of the shelter, not clean and taut like a camper would leave it, but loose, sagging in the middle. Faded blue, fraying at the edges. It flapped in the breeze, tied off with old yellow cord. Beneath it, a nest of leaves, pine boughs, and what looked like a shredded foam pad. I called out, nothing. Did a quick walk around the shelter. No gear, no footprints, no heat off the fire ring. Just the tarp and the weird way it billowed like someone had left in a hurry. I almost packed up and kept walking, but the sun was low, and I'd been hiking since morning. I told myself whoever left it probably got spooked by a bear or bad weather. Happens more than you'd think. I set up on the opposite side of the shelter, inside, against the back wall, just far enough from the tarp that I didn't have to think about it. The night dropped cold and fast. By 8 p.m., I was zipped into my bag, listening to the forest breathe. There were no distant cars, no planes overhead, just the whisper of wind through the wet trees and the occasional creak of a branch shifting weight. Around 3 a.m., something changed. I don't know what woke me. Maybe it was silence, a sharper kind, like everything had paused. Then I heard it, breathing, not mine, not close, but distinct. Wet, ragged, like someone trying to breathe through a mouth full of water, the kind of sound that comes from deep in the chest. It was coming from the tarp. I sat up slowly, heart already kicking. Through the narrow slit between logs and tarp, I could see it bulge and release, up, then down, again, and again, like something was under it. Sleeping, I held still, barely breathing myself. It wasn't wind. The tarp moved too rhythmically, too slow, and the breathing didn't sync with mine. It had weight, strain. I waited 10 minutes before I moved, slipped out of my bag, grabbed my light, stepped barefoot onto cold stone, and crept toward the tarp, beam off. Every step was a heartbeat. When I was close enough to reach out, I turned the light on and grabbed the edge of the tarp in one motion. I yanked it back. There was nothing. No body. No indent in the leaves, no heat, no scent, just a flattened bed of damp mulch and, beneath it, a hole. Not a big hole, maybe 2 feet wide, 2 feet deep, but it was fresh, clean earth, dark and slick like something had burrowed down, or crawled up. I stood over it for a long time, light trembling in my hand. The breathing was gone, but I swear, I still felt it, like the ground was still exhaling. I didn't sleep after that. I packed my gear before the sun was up, moving slow, quiet. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching from the tree line. Nothing ever moved. The woods felt untouched, but in a way that was wrong, like no animals had passed through in days. By dawn, I'd made it half a mile up the slope, still couldn't shake the feeling that something was behind me. Not chasing, just following. The trees creaked with wind, and every echo sounded like breath. At one point, I thought I heard something dragging through the brush behind me. A low shuffle, like something wet pulling itself along the leaves. When I stopped, it stopped. When I moved again, nothing, just silence. Back in town, I couldn't stop thinking about the hole. I even looked up animal dents, foxes, groundhogs, badgers. But none of them made sense. Too clean, too centered, too deliberate. A week later, I drove back. I know how stupid that sounds, but I had to see it again. Had to make sure I didn't imagine it. I parked in the same pull-off, hiked the same trail. When I reached the hollow, I stopped cold. The shelter was gone, not collapsed, not burned, gone. There was nothing but an open patch of earth, scattered with mossy stones and the remnants of a rusted fire ring. No tarp, no logs, no picnic table, just emptiness, like it had never been there. I wandered in a daze, circling where the shelter had stood. My GPS still marked my saved waypoint, same coordinates, but there was nothing left to mark, except, near the center of where the shelter had been, I found it. A depression in the earth, about 2 feet wide, freshly disturbed. I didn't look inside. I backed away slowly, feeling like I was being watched, not by eyes, but by the land itself. The trees, the dirt, the air, like something had surfaced and then gone back down. That night, I couldn't sleep, and I haven't since, not well. Some nights, I'll wake around 3 a.m., fever heart racing, drenched in sweat, and I'll swear I hear it again, from beneath my bed, or the floorboards, or the base of my tent, when I try to camp again. The slow rise and fall of breathing. I'd been camping in the Appalachians most of my life, but Rennick Hollow had a way of making me uneasy. It's not far from the Greenbrier River, quiet stretch of dense forest tucked between low ridge lines. Most folks avoid it. Locals say the land down there doesn't keep still. I never asked what that meant. I was there late one October weekend, scouting a solo route for next spring's hikes. The rain had been steady all day. That soft, whispering kind that sinks into everything. Your socks, your food, your bones. By the time I set up camp, my tarp was dripping, and the trees above were swaying in the mist like they were whispering to one another. I found a clearing just off an old game trail, flat enough for a tarp lean-to. In the center was a fire ring, stones arranged in a rough circle, half buried in wet moss. Looked like it hadn't been used in years. But when I brushed the surface of the ashes with my boot, I froze. They were warm. At first I thought it was my imagination, that leftover heat from the day had soaked into the stones. But when I crouched closer, I could see faint smoke still trapped in the cracks, barely visible in the dim light. It hadn't rained hard enough to make steam. It was heat, real, recent heat. Someone had been here. I looked around. The hollow was wrapped in fog, silent except for the soft hiss of rain through leaves. No footprints but mine in the mud. No broken twigs. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just missed someone, like they'd stepped away minutes before I arrived. I set up my tarp anyway, because moving meant losing light. Once my small fire was going, I tried to ignore how uneasy the clearing felt, but something about the place was wrong in ways I couldn't define. It wasn't just the warmth of the ashes, it was how the woods went silent when I stopped moving. That night, I heard movement. It wasn't animals. It came slow, deliberate, from beyond the tree line. A twig snap here, a soft shuffle there. Then, once, a low cough, just human enough to make my heart stutter. I gripped my knife and stayed still, letting my eyes adjust to the thin orange light. No shadows, no shape, just fog. When the rain started again, the sound stopped. By midnight, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my flashlight and checked the fire ring again. This time I found 2 fresh cigarette butts, half buried in the wet dirt beside the stones. I don't smoke. None of my friends do either. The filters were crushed flat, still damp. Nearby I saw a boot print deep in the mud, much larger than mine. Someone had stood there, watching. I didn't sleep that night. I sat under the tarp with the knife across my lap, the fire down to embers, waiting for something to move. The woods pressed in around me, black, breathing. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep. Every drip of rent on nylon made my pulse jump. When dawn finally came, I was still sitting there shaking. I hadn't heard a thing for hours. The woods looked harmless again, gray and soaked, the fog peeling off the trees. I told myself I'd imagined it all, that the warmth, the prints, the cigarettes were leftovers from some hunter or hiker days before. When I finally lay down to rest, exhaustion pulled me under fast, but when I woke an hour later, something had changed. My tarp was slashed, long, jagged tears, 3 of them, clean through the fabric like someone had dragged a knife. And on the tree behind where I'd been sleeping, carved deep into the bark, was my name. Every letter neat, every stroke deliberate. I packed and left before I even boiled water, but leaving Rennick Hollow didn't end it. It only made me wonder what or who I'd been sharing that clearing with. I didn't go back to Rennick Hollow for nearly a year. I told myself it was superstition, that I'd just scared myself out of sleep, nothing more. But the image of my name carved into that tree stayed with me. It didn't feel like vandalism. It felt personal. Last spring, I went back, not to camp, just to see. Sometimes your mind plays tricks when you're alone too long in the woods. I wanted proof that I'd overreacted, that there was nothing waiting out there. It was late afternoon when I reached the trailhead near Rennick Creek. The same wet smell lingered in the air. Pine needles, old rent, and that sour rot of wet bark. The trail looked almost identical, but when I reached the clearing, I stopped dead. The fire ring was gone, not destroyed, gone. Stones moved, ashes cleared, ground smoothed over like no one had ever been there. But there was something else in its place. A single, half-buried boot, same pattern as the print I'd seen last year. The boot was waterlogged and torn, black with mold. I couldn't tell how long it had been there. I walked the perimeter of the clearing, on one of the trees, same one where my tarp had hung. I found the carving again. But the bark around it had changed. Someone had tried to cut deeper, tracing over the letters again and again, gouging them almost to the core. When I touched it, the wood felt soft, rotted through. Inside the groove was something small, pale. At first I thought it was fungus, but when I looked closer, I realized it was fabric fiber. Thread, like someone had pressed a piece of cloth into the cut while carving. The woods were silent again, that heavy, unnatural kind of quiet that feels like pressure. I crouched to inspect the boot, and noticed cigarette butts scattered in the leaves nearby. Same breath, filtered, crushed flat. Some looked old, others almost new, edges dry, not swollen by rent. That meant someone had been here recently. I backed away, keeping my eyes on the tree line. That's when I heard it. Not movement this time. Breathing, faint, steady, close enough I could almost feel it. I turned slow, scanning the fog between the trees. There was nothing, no shape, no color, just the faint shimmer of light where moisture caught the air. The breathing stopped when I moved. I stayed there waiting, until the silence became unbearable. Then I turned and left. The walk back to the truck felt endless. Every sound, the crunch of my boots, the creak of my pack, felt too loud. When I finally reached the road, I didn't look back. That night, in the motel off Route 219, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying what I'd seen. The smoothed out fire ring, the boot, the carving. Around midnight, I stepped out for air. The lot was empty except for my truck and the hum of a vending machine. When I came back in, something caught my eye. Mud on the carpet, near the door. Fresh, one large boot print, smeared and wet. I froze. The smell hit me then. The same metallic scent from the hollow. I turned on every lock in the room, checked the lock twice, but there was no one there. By morning, the print had dried into the carpet. The smell lingered. I left town before the sun was fully up. It's been months now. Sometimes when I camp closer to home, I'll still wake to the faint scent of smoke, even when there's no fun. Once, I found a cigarette butt beside my tent flap, and once, just once,
I woke to find a small carving on the nearest tree. Not my full name this time, just the first letter, but carved fresh, still wet with sap. I don't go near Rennick Hollow anymore, but I still think about the locals' warning, how they said the land down there doesn't keep still. I think I finally understand what they meant.
I've been backpacking the Appalachians since my early 20s, mostly short stints back then, weekends in the Smokies or Shenandoah, when I had time between classes or shifts. Now that I'm 38 and working remotely, I make a point of getting out at least once a month, just to keep my brain from getting fried by screens and spreadsheets. This happened last fall, late October, the best time of year to hike, in my opinion. You get that perfect mix of crisp mornings and warm afternoons, no bugs, and way fewer people. I'd planned a 4-day solo loop in West Virginia, deep in the Monongahela forest, following a series of old CCC trails that, according to the ranger, aren't official anymore, but they're still walkable if you don't mind rough tread. That was all I needed to hear. I stopped by the ranger station near Davis before heading out. A guy named Jeff, mid-50s, salt and pepper beard, heavy flannel, handed me a laminated map of the designated trails, then pulled out a second paper one from under the desk. "This one's a little older," he said. "If you want to explore the CCC stuff, this'll help. They don't maintain most of it, so don't expect signage or blazes, but it's all there." The paper looked yellowed at the edges, like it had been in a drawer a long time, but the trail network was marked clearly, thin red lines curling through valleys, over ridges, looping back on themselves like veins. I thanked him and said I'd be back Thursday. He grinned and said, "Watch your light. Gets dark early this time of year." Day one was smooth. I hiked a 10-mile stretch past spruce groves and mossy boulders, following an old fire road that climbed slow through switchbacks. I passed no one, just squirrels and a few turkeys crashing through the brush. I made camp near a creek, where the water ran cold and clear, and the only sounds were wind and the occasional creak of a tree shifting its weight. That night, I unfolded the paper map and marked my location with a pen. A small black dot just west of a trail loop, labeled Ridge Spur, just keeping track. I'd done this on dozens of trips, marked each camp spot at the end of the day, more habit than anything else. I tucked the map in my bag, zipped into my sleeping bag, and slept hard. The next morning, I made coffee and oatmeal, while mist drifted like low smoke through the trees. It was cold enough that my breath hung in front of me. I dried my tent in the sun for a bit before packing up. When I pulled the map out to plan the day's route, I noticed something strange. The trail I had followed yesterday, the one clearly labeled as cutting past the creek where I camped, was gone. Not faint, not folded or smudged, just gone. In its place was a rerouted trail that curved wide to the east, skirting far away from the spot where I'd camped. But what really got me, what stopped me cold, was the label that had replaced the area I was in. In small faded print, "Do not stay," right next to my mark, my own pen dot, clear as ever. I stared at it for a long time. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture, then folded the map away, told myself it was a mistake, a misprint. Maybe the map had been altered by some past ranger or hiker. People write all kinds of things on trail maps. Could have been a joke, but something about the lettering didn't feel like a joke. It wasn't in someone's handwriting. It looked printed, as if it had been there all along. That day I followed the rerouted trail. It wasn't even hard to follow. Someone had cleared brush more recently than the surrounding paths. Logs stacked to the side. Not fresh, but not decades old either. It felt intentional. The forest was quiet in that particular Appalachian way. Not peaceful, watchful, like it's listening, waiting. By late afternoon, I came across an old CCC shelter, 3-sided, roof sagging, thick with lichen and rot. The floor was cracked stone, half covered with brittle leaves. Inside, tucked in a dry corner, was a small dust-covered bundle. I figured maybe someone left gear behind. It was a folded rain jacket and a plastic bag containing a torn notebook. pages water-stained and curling. Out of curiosity, I opened it. Most of it was illegible, the ink smudged to gray streaks, but one sentence, near the middle, was still readable. I marked the map wrong. I know that now. It said don't stay. I thought it meant the shelter. I shut the notebook, stomach tight. The wind outside had picked up, whistling through the holes in the roof. I didn't feel like reading anymore. That night, I camped away from the shelter, just inside a grove of fir trees, where the ground was soft with needles. I kept the map folded in my jacket pocket, couldn't bring myself to look at it again, but I didn't sleep well. Sometime around 2 or 3 a.m., I woke to the sound of footsteps, slow, crunching, not animal light or darting like deer or raccoon. These were measured, human. I laid still, heart pounding, listening. The steps circled once around the tent, then stopped. I didn't move, didn't breathe. No light, no voice. Just waiting. Then just as slowly as they'd come, the steps moved off into the woods again, crunching, fading, then nothing. I lay there until dawn. When I finally unzipped the tent, there were no prints in the frost-covered ground, not a one. By the time I reached the junction where the rerouted trail met back with the original loop, I felt like something was off. I couldn't explain it, but it felt like I wasn't where I was supposed to be, like the map and the land weren't lining up. I stopped at a flat stretch to get my bearings, sat on a stump, pulled out the map again. This time, it was normal. No rerouted trail, no do not stay, just the same faded red lines I remembered from the ranger station. My pen mark was still there, but now it sat innocently beside the creek bend. No strange warnings, no altered paths. I checked my phone photo, the one I'd taken earlier. Gone. The image was there, but the trail looked like the current one. No do not stay, no altered paths. My pen dot sat like it had always belonged. My stomach turned cold. I stood up, packed fast. It was the first time in my adult life that I cut a trip short. Something about that map, about what changed and what didn't, wasn't right. That night I drove back into town and returned the map to the ranger station. Jeff wasn't there. A younger woman was on duty. When I asked about the old CCC trails, and if there'd been any changes to the maps over the years, she gave me a polite shrug. Not really. Some trails get overgrown, but nobody updates the old stuff. We just tell people to stick to the designated routes. I asked if she had any copies of older maps. She checked a drawer, pulled out a folder, and let me look. None of them matched the one I'd used, and none had that label. No do not stay. Not anywhere. That was 6 months ago. I still think about that line, about how my dot ended up beside it, about the notebook, and the footsteps. I don't go back to West Virginia anymore, and I don't use paper maps either, because some things, they change when you mark them, and some warnings don't come before the danger. They come after. I couldn't stop thinking about that label. Do not stay. It followed me home like a stone in the gut. One of those thoughts that doesn't hurt right away, but wears you down over time. I kept pulling out the photo. I thought I took of the altered map, but it was always the same now. The normal version. The one with no warnings. The one that made me feel like I was going crazy. I told a few friends about it. The ones who camp. They all gave me the same nod. That half smile people give when they think you're exaggerating, but don't want to say so. It was just a weird map, man. One of them said, "You probably misread it." Maybe, but I'd been backpacking since I was 19. I've read hundreds of maps, and I don't misread labels that tell me not to stay somewhere. The more I tried to forget it, the more it burrowed in. The sound of those footsteps outside my tent, the stillness that didn't feel natural, the strange care taken to reroute a trail just around a certain spot, and the line in the notebook. I thought it meant the shelter. It was mid-January when I get it. I told myself I just wanted to make peace with it, see it again, prove to myself it was just bad sleep, a smudge on a page, maybe a prank, something explainable. I emailed the ranger station ahead of time. Jeff still worked there, apparently, but was out sick. I didn't bother asking for the same map. I drove up on a Friday. Weather was dry but bitter cold.
I parked at the same turnout and packed light, just an overnight. I only wanted to see the place again. Hike in, find the shelter, sleep, hike out, nothing more. The trail felt familiar, but colder somehow, less friendly. The trees were bare now, black limbs rattling in the wind like bones above frost-hardened ground. There were no other cars on the road when I parked, no bird song on the trail, just the sound of my own boots crunching. By the time I reached the old junction, it was late afternoon. The sun was already beginning to slant through the trees in those long amber beams that vanished too fast. The rerouted trail, not there. There was no sign of cleared brush, no side path arcing east, just the original CCC route, right past the creek bend, up toward the shelter. I kept walking, and there it was, the shelter, still standing. It looked exactly like before, three-sided low tin roof, walls blackened with rot, the same broken picnic table, same moss growing through the stone floor. But it wasn't empty this time. Someone had left something. Right in the center of the shelter floor, where I'd found the notebook before, sat a plastic bag. Not old, not weather-worn, new, clean. I approached it slowly. Kneeling, I unzipped it. Inside a folded map, the same map I had used in October, and in the exact same place where I'd marked my camp before. The words were there, "Do not stay." Same faded font, same placement. My pen mark was already on it. I dropped the bag. I stood still for a long time. Then I heard something, just a single click, like someone stepping on a twig. I spun around. Nothing, just woods, bare branches, fading light. But the air felt wrong, like I was breathing through wool, like the forest was holding its breath. I backed out of the shelter and set up my tent 50 yards away, just off the trail, close enough to run if something happened, but far enough I wouldn't be sleeping in that damn structure. Night came hard, cold, no moon. Around 1 a.m., I woke up, not from a sound, from the silence. It was too quiet, no breeze, no creaking trees, just this blank humming stillness that pressed in on my ears. And then came the sound, not footsteps this time, scraping, like something dragging across the stone floor of the shelter, slow, deliberate. It moved once, stopped, then again, closer. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then it stopped altogether. For a long time there was nothing. And then tap, just one, like a fingertip on plastic. I looked over at the mesh of the tent, toward the direction of the shelter. A shadow was standing at the edge of the tree line. No light, no shape, just the absence of everything else. It didn't move. I blinked, and it was gone. But I didn't sleep again. At first light, I packed everything and left. Didn't stop, didn't eat, didn't drink, just walked. By the time I reached the car, my hands were numb, and my breath came in rugged gasps. Back home I tried to rationalize it again. I opened the map from the plastic bag. It was still in my pack. I laid it out on the kitchen table, pulled out my phone, took a photo. Label was there. I took another picture, still there, left it for an hour, came back. Now it wasn't. Just the same clean paper map as before. No trail rewrotes. No warning. I opened the photo gallery. All 3 images showed nothing but the clean version. No label. No mark. It had changed again. I haven't hiked alone since. I still have the map. It sits in the bottom drawer of my desk, wrapped in the plastic bag I found it in. Sometimes, when I pull it out late at night and unfold it slowly, I swear I catch a glimpse of the words before they vanish. Do not stay. And I've started to wonder if it's not a warning to hikers, but a warning from someone like me, who made the mistake of going back. Someone who thought they could explain it. Someone who stayed.
I'd been hiking sections of the Appalachian Trail for years, mostly alone. You get used to silence out there. The kind that feels heavy enough to press against your chest. But the stretch near Roan Mountain had a different kind of quiet. The air seemed to hold its breath, and every sound, every gust through the trees, every distant owl, felt like it was being watched. That afternoon, I'd pushed farther than I meant to. A mist had rolled in thick over the ridgeline, cutting visibility to maybe 20 feet. My boots were soaked, and the wind carried that cold, earthy smell of wet soil and old pine. When I stumbled across the dry creek bed, I figured it was as good a place as any to make camp. The bed was maybe 20 feet wide, winding through a low hollow between the trees. The mud at the bottom had long since turned to cracked gray dust, the kind that leaves ghostly prints when you step through it. The tree line on either side was dense, sloping sharply upward, so the hollow felt closed in, almost claustrophobic. I pitched my tarp near the bank and set a small fire, the smoke curling weakly through the damp air. As the light faded, the woods sank into that familiar Appalachian darkness, not black, but thick and colorless, where the edges of things seemed to melt into one another. The only sound was the occasional creak of wood cooling in the fire, and the faint drip of water somewhere far off. Then I heard the first whisper. At first I thought it was just wind, threading through the hollow, but it came again, faint, hushed, close. It carried a rhythm to it, like words too soft to catch. I sat up and listened. The sound came from the creek bed, low and deliberate. It didn't stop. It was like someone was pacing down there, mumbling under their breath, turning back and forth in the dry dust. Every few seconds I'd hear a step, then a whisper, then silence, like they were thinking, deciding something. I shined my flashlight down into the hollow. The beam cut through the mist and landed on pale dust, rocks, and nothing else. Empty. Still, the whispering went on. The longer I listened, the more certain I became that it wasn't one voice. Sometimes it sounded deeper, then suddenly higher, lighter, like a child's voice, quick and breathy. They overlapped sometimes, like a conversation just out of reach. I called out, "Hello," but the words felt swallowed, like they didn't carry. Nothing answered, just the sound of something shifting in the dark. I stayed up for hours, gripping my knife, watching the edge of my firelight flicker against the trees. Every time I thought it stopped, it started again, soft, deliberate pacing. By the time dawn pushed through the mist, I hadn't slept a minute. The fire had burned to ash. The woods looked ordinary again, quiet, still. I packed up fast, wanting to leave the place behind, but something pulled me toward the creek bed before I went. The ground down there was damp, but not muddy. The surface was smooth dust, except for one thing: footprints, dozens of them. Some were adult-sized, heavy and clear, pressed deep into the dirt. Others were small, too small, barefoot impressions scattered among the larger prints, the toes distinct, the heels shallow, and all of them were wet. I crouched down, pressing my hand to one, cold, damp, fresh, but the nearest water was miles away. I stood there a long time, staring at those footprints, the sun climbing pale and weak through the fog. They led in circles, weaving around themselves like whoever made them had been pacing for hours, maybe all night. And then I noticed something else. The prints stopped, about 10 feet from where I'd slept. They stopped facing me. I told myself it had to be runoff, maybe moisture from underground. Maybe I'd been hearing water gurgling in the dark, or animals moving through the brush. But the longer I hiked that morning, the less sense it made. There hadn't been running water in that creek bed for months. Every hiker I'd met had said so, and the dampness on those prints hadn't been mud. It had been clean, like lake water, cold. By the time I reached the next trail junction, the sky had gone gray again. I stopped to rest, but my thoughts kept drifting back to the hollow, the pacing, the voices, the small barefoot tracks. I told myself I'd just been tired, that maybe I'd been dreaming with my eyes open. Still, that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every time I stopped to rest, I'd hear something faint behind me, 1 or 2 slow steps, then nothing. Once, I turned around fast enough to catch movement in the fog, but it was gone before I could focus. I set camp earlier than usual, this time farther up the ridge, well away from the hollows. I built no fire. I just sat in the growing dark, listening. For hours, nothing, just wind and rain. But around midnight,
I heard it again, a soft crunch in the leaves below my camp, then another. Not an animal, too slow, too deliberate. The sound moved along the slope, circling, staying just beyond where the light from my lantern could reach. I caught glimpses, faint movement between trunks, a flicker of something pale. I stood there with my light raised, heart pounding, scanning the fog. That's when I saw them. Footprints, fresh ones, leading up the slope toward me, wet again, glistening faintly in the lantern light. I followed them with my eyes, until they ended at the edge of my camp, no more than 10 feet from where I stood, and there, pressed into the mud beside my pack, was a small bare footprint, no larger than a child's hand. It was angled toward me. I froze. The woods had gone silent again. No wind, no rain, just my breathing. I shined the light around, but there was nothing. No movement, no sound. I didn't sleep that night. I sat up, knife in hand, until the sky began to lighten. When I finally stepped out of the tarp, my eye fell immediately to the ground. The prints were gone, all of them, washed away or covered, except for one. It was deeper now, pressed hard into the mud where it hadn't been before. The toes dug in, the heel sharp, and next to it, etched faintly into the soil with something sharp, maybe a stick, was a single line. Stay above. I packed and left before the fog burned off. That was 3 years ago. I haven't camped near Roan Mountain since, but sometimes, when the wind shifts through the hollows at night, I swear I can still hear the rhythm of those whispers, slow, patient, pacing back and forth. And once, last summer, I drove past the trailhead again, on my way through town. The sign for Renfro Bridge had been replaced. Someone had carved into the post below it, just one word, rough and uneven. Below, I didn't stop. I kept drunk. But every so often, when I close my eyes, I still see those footprints in the dust, small and wet, circling the place I slept. And I can't help but think, whatever walks down there in the hollows, it's still pacing, and it remembers where I was.
You ever have something happen that you can't explain? Not just strange, but wrong in a way that makes your skin itch when you think about it. That's what this was. I wasn't planning to talk about it. Honestly, I figured keeping quiet would make it go away, or at least make it easier to sleep. But it's been over a year now, and I still wake up in a cold sweat thinking about that photo and what it means. Anyway, this happened in the fall of 2022, late October. I'd taken some time off from work to finally check out a stretch of the Appalachian backcountry near Irwin, Tennessee. I live in Asheville, just a couple hours southeast, and I've hiked solo for years. I'm careful, always file a trip plan, carry a Garmin, the works. This loop was nothing crazy. 4 days on trail, a mix of AT side spurs and a couple lesser-known connectors around Unaka Mountain. Weather was good, traffic light. I got up there on a Thursday, parked at the trailhead just off Rock Creek Road, and started the loop counterclockwise. Hiked about 10 miles before setting up camp near a ridge above Little Bald. I'd passed 2 other solo hikers that day, older guy with a red bandana and a college-age kid with headphones, but didn't say much beyond howdy. The next morning, maybe 9 a.m., I was boiling water for coffee when 2 hikers came into camp from a spur trail, mid-30s, maybe a couple, both friendly, light southern accents. We got to chatting. They said they'd stayed the night down by the creek just a few miles below me, and were heading north toward Beauty Spot Bald. The guy, whose name was Lucas, said, "Didn't think we'd see you again this morning." I raised an eyebrow. Again, he laughed a little, like I was messing with him. "Last night, at the creek, you walked by just before sunset. Said you'd looped around and were heading to the ridge, but told us not to take the north trail after dark." I stopped stirring my instant coffee. "No," I said. "I was here before dark. Been at this site since 5 or so." His smile faded a bit, eyes scanning my face. "No, I mean, it was you, man. Same jacket, same voice. You were even carrying a black Nalgene like that." My stomach tightened. I told him again, "Wasn't me." That's when the woman Carla pulled out her phone. We took a picture of you. We thought it was funny that someone would come all the way out here just to warn folks off a trail. She swiped a few times, then turned the screen toward me, and there I was, standing maybe 10 feet from their fire pit, waving, grinning. Except, the jacket I had on in that photo was gray and forest green, like something from a surplus store, a kind I used to own years ago, but didn't pack. I didn't even own it anymore. Mine for this trip was blue and black, brand new from REI, but the guy in the photo, he looked exactly like me, not similar. Exactly, same beard, same frame, same posture, even the way my mouth pulled a little tighter on one side when I smiled. That wasn't something you could fake, not easily. But I had never met these people before, not until 5 minutes ago, and I had never stood at their campsite. I handed the phone back with shaky hands. Where exactly did you say this happened? They pointed downhill, junction near Balsam Spur, just off the river fork. I didn't know what to say. I mumbled something about maybe someone playing a prank. They didn't seem convinced. As they left, Lucas called over his shoulder. We were planning to hike the northern ridge today, but I don't know, man. That warning gave me the creeps. Think we'll stay south. They disappeared into the trees. The rest of the day, I felt like my skin didn't fit right. You ever have that feeling, like someone just brushed past your shoulder, but there's no one there? I tried to shake it off, told myself it had to be some look-alike. Backpackers share gear all the time. Maybe the guy in the picture just seemed like me in the moment. But the thing that stuck with me the most, aside from the jacket, was what Lucas said. The guy in the photo told them not to take the north trail after dark. Thing is, that's the same trail I planned to be on that night. I'd been looking forward to it. Quiet ridgeline stretch, minimal elevation gain. Perfect for camping. I tried to write it off as coincidence, but the words kept circling in my head like vulture. Don't take the north trail after dark. Still, I kept on schedule, made it to the junction by mid-afternoon, ate lunch, topped off water from a spring, then headed up the slope toward the ridge. It was steeper than I remembered from the topo map, mostly overgrown with thorn brush and slick rocks, barely any footprints. I passed 2 empty campsites that looked like no one had touched them in days, fire pits full of cold ash, torn ground cloth under a boulder, no wrappers or gear, just that hollow feeling like someone had left too fast or too long ago. By the time I hit the ridge, it was nearing 5, sunlight, cutting low and gold through the trees, long shadows. That's when I noticed the first one, a boot print, same tread as mine, same size, fresh. Just ahead of me, I followed the ridge another quarter mile, another print, deeper this time, like someone had paused there. At one point, I rounded a bend in the trail, and smelled something faint, familiar, pine tar, maybe, but under it, metallic, rusted, like dried blood, and old pennies. There were no animals, no bird song, just wind shifting through trees, like breath. I tried to steady my nerves, focused on finding a site for the night. Eventually, I set up camp on a small flat ledge just off the trail, overlooked a hollowed-out valley of bare poplars and broken rock. I cooked in silence, ears tuned to every snap and groan of the woods. Around 9 p.m., I heard footsteps, not from the trail, from behind my tent, measured, slow, like someone circling. I killed my lantern, sat still, nothing. Then something scraped across the rock near the fire ring. Not a brint, not an animal, a boot, sliding. I reached for my flash, light and shone it around the edge of the trees. Nothing, just cold air and darker forest. I stayed up until 2 a.m., heart thudding, waiting for something else. When I finally fell asleep, it was shallow, adrenaline, my limbs buzzing with that edge of danger awareness, like when your adrenaline's worn off, but your body hasn't gotten the message yet. In the morning, I stepped out to break camp and found something waiting at the base of a tree, 20 feet from my tent. A jacket, folded neatly, forest green, just like the one from the photo, just like the one I didn't pack. On top of it sat a single pine cone, like someone had left it there. For me, I stood there staring at that like it was a
coiled in the dirt. It wasn't just similar. It was the jacket from the photo. Same worn cuffs, same faded pattern on the sleeve where my old one used to have a burn mark from a campfire years ago. Except that jacket had been donated to Goodwill 3 winters back. I touched it with one finger, cold but dry, folded too neatly to be something the wind dropped. No tracks around, no footprints in the dim leaves, just the gem and the pun. I backed up to the tent and sat on my bare canister to keep from shaking. My head was buzzing, the way it used to after bad calls in EMS when my adrenaline was still high but my thinking went thin. Okay, I thought. Options. Option 1. Someone is screwing with me, follows me up here, leaves the gem. No footprints. But how? No noise, no lights, no prints. Option 2. Coincidence. Someone with the same gem face. The one Lucas and Carla swore was me. I couldn't make either option stick. I packed up fast. I didn't even make coffee. The sun was low, the forest in that pale orange that looks beautiful from a distance, but up close feels like the woods are holding their breath. I slung my pack on and started hiking north, the way I planned, because heading back down the way I came meant 4 extra miles, through a steep ravine, and I didn't trust my legs for them. Every 50 yards or so, I glanced back, empty trail, but the smell of rusted metal came and went on the breeze, faint, but there. Around mid-morning, I reached the spur where Lucas and Carla said they'd seen me the night before. It looked like any other junction, a fallen log, a fire ring, half filled with water, a scattering of acorns, no sign of a second den.
No note.
No nothing. But when I crouched to check the fire ring, I noticed something just under the gray ash, a boot print, same tread as mine, pressed deep as if someone had stood there a long time. I snapped a photo with my phone. When I looked at it a second later, the print was just a smear of mud. I tried. I stopped taking photos. The trail narrowed and climbed, weaving along a knife-edge ridge. No blazes, no markers, just rock and moss, and those endless patient trees. I began to notice other things. The prints on the trail, always one at a time, always just ahead of me, started to look like they weren't just mine. The strung, sometimes a few inches longer, sometimes shorter, like whoever left them wasn't walking exactly like me, but trying to. At one point, I paused to catch my breath and heard a faint cough up ahead. Not an animal sound, human, low, dry. I called out, no answer. When I rounded the bend, the trail was empty. By afternoon, the clouds had thickened, low and bruised, spitting mist. My shirt was damp, my hands raw. I kept telling myself I'd stop at the next decent site and set up, get warm, think straight. That's when I saw it. Through the trees ahead, my tent, my blue and black tent, pitched on a flat stretch of ground near an overlook, except I hadn't set it up there. I'd been hiking all day with it on my... Whoa! I unshouldered my pack, unzipped it, pulled the tent out. It was there, rolled tight. I looked up again. The other tent, my tent, was still standing ahead, its door flap moving slightly. I wanted to turn around. Every cell in my body screamed at me to turn around, but my feet kept moving. Closer. The tent sat perfectly pitched, gun, lines taut, stakes at precise and everything about it neat in a way mine never was. The flap opened a few inches, no sound. I shone my flashlight inside. Empty. Just my sleeping bag, or one that looked like laid out smooth, unzipped, like someone had just left. The air inside was cold, but smelled faintly of sweat and pine. I backed out slowly, and that's when I heard it. Behind me, on the trail, footsteps, measured, slow, wait as I turned. A figure stood about 20 yards back in the mist. Same jacket, same pack, same stance. It was me, not similar, not a blur. He didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there, head tilted slightly, like a dog watching a stranger. I opened my mouth, but no sound came out. Then he smiled, and started walking toward me. That's where everything. I grabbed my actual tent, crammed it into my pack, and bolted off the ridge into the brush, slid down a slope slick with moss and dead leaves, branches slapping my arms, mud sucking at my boots. I didn't stop until I reached the valley floor, chest heaving, lungs burning. I didn't know where just that I was lower, out of sight of the ridge. I crouched behind a fallen log, listening. Up above, on the ridge, boots crunched, slow, then silence, then a voice, my voice. Don't take the north trail. After dark, exactly like Lucas had said, calm, friendly, a warning. But it wasn't me saying. When the echo died, the forest went silent again, not even wind. I stayed there until dusk, clutching my pack, trying to convince myself to move. Eventually, in the failing light, I started walking downstream, hoping to hit the old fire rubber. Every so often between the trees, I caught flashes of green. A jacket, sometimes ahead, sometimes behind. Always just far enough that I couldn't see the face. I made it back to my truck after dark. Don't remember half the hike out, just that when I reached the lot, it was empty. No other cars. I tossed my pack in the back seat and drove until I hit a gas station near Irwin. The cashier gave me a look like I'd been through a war. When I got home, I checked my phone. All the photos from that day, the prints, the tent, were blank. Just trees, no tracks, no duplicate gear, nothing but me. I haven't hunted. Sometimes though, I'll be in a store and catch a glimpse of myself in a security monitor. Just enough lag that for a heartbeat it feels like someone else is moving first. And every time consumed with thick verbal and I still don't know which one of us was right.
I've spent a lot of my adult life hiking and camping alone. It started as a way to clear my head after work. A few nights away from the phone, the traffic, the steady grind of small-town life. I'm not some hardcore survivalist or adrenaline junkie. I just like being away from people sometimes. You can hear yourself think up there, in the mountains, under the pines, miles from anything. But there's one trip I can't stop thinking about. It's been nearly 2 years now, and I still wake up some nights to a sound that shouldn't mean anything. A soft clack, clack, clack of stone against stone. This happened near Clingman's Dome, right on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee, the highest point in the Great Smoky Mountains. If you've ever been there, you know how the fog just sits in those woods. It moves like water, slow, heavy, wrapping around everything. The air smells like wet earth and pine tar. You can go from bright sunlight to white blindness in a minute. I'd been planning a solo 2-night trip, just me, my tent, a small propane burner, and my pack. It was early October, right after the leaves had started turning. That golden red canopy makes you feel like you're walking through a painting. My route wasn't on any main trail. I'd found it through an old hiking forum, a lightly used path that followed a ridge about 5 miles southwest of Clingman's Dome. Someone mentioned a good flat patch for camping near a dry creek bed up there. Said it was quiet and eerie, but worth it. That should have been my first red flag. I parked near the overlook just after noon and started hiking in. The air was cool, maybe in the low 60s, but the climb got my heart rate up quick. The path wound through heavy spruce forest, the kind where sunlight barely touches the ground. It was dead quiet, except for the sound of my boots crunching gravel and the occasional caw of a raven echoing through the trees. About halfway in, I saw them. 3 stone cairns. They were small, maybe knee-high, built from smooth gray rocks that looked like they'd been pulled from a creek. Each was stacked neatly, 5 or 6 stones tall. I've seen cairns all over the Smokies. Hikers use them to mark trails sometimes, but these were too close together and too deliberate. Each stood about a yard apart, right along the edge of the path. The odd thing was, this wasn't a marked trail. There shouldn't have been a reason for anyone to build markers out here. Still, I shrugged it off. Probably just another hiker with too much time. By the time I reached the clearing, it was near dusk. The spot was just like the forum described. Flat, open, surrounded by pines. I set up camp, cooked some beans on my burner, and settled in. The wind had picked up, so I could hear the trees rubbing together, creaking like old doors. When you're that far out, every sound gets magnified. A squirrel scurrying in the leaves sounds like a bear. The woods have their own language. Little sighs and groans you learn to tune out after a while. But that night, something stood out. I was sitting by the fire, watching the embers fade, when I heard it clack, clack, clack. It was faint, distant at first. Two hard objects tapping together. Then a pause. Then again, clack, clack. At first, I figured it was branches knocking in the wind. But it wasn't irregular like that. It was rhythmic, deliberate. I turned off my lantern and listened. The sound was coming from somewhere below, maybe near the old creek bed, about 50 yards down the slope. I waited a few minutes, gripping my flashlight, heart thumping harder than I'd admit. The sound went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped completely. Just silence, the deep, total kind you only get in the mountains. Eventually, I crawled into my tent and told myself it was nothing. Maybe rocks shifting in the soil, or an animal digging. But when I unzipped my tent, the next morning, there were 4 cairns on the trail. The 3 from before, and 1 more. It stood maybe 20 feet from the others, perfectly built like the rest. Same smooth stones, same shape. I stared at it for a long time. Then I laughed under my breath, trying to shake it off. Probably some hiker came through during the night. But the nearest parking area was miles away, and I hadn't seen another soul all day. Still, I told myself it didn't mean anything. The second day was clear and cold. I spent most of it exploring, followed a few deer trails, deeper into the woods, took some photos, tried to ignore how empty the forest felt. Even the birds seemed to stay away from this ridge. When dusk started settling in again, I got a small fire going, made some coffee, and sat listening to the wind. It was stronger that night. I could hear it dragging through the trees, that long, lonely hum that makes you feel like the forest is breathing. But then came the sound again. Clack, clack, clack. It started faint, like before. Then closer still. I froze. It was coming from the direction of the trail, from where the cairn stood. I shined my light toward the path, but the beam just hit fog and tree trunks. The tapping stopped. Then, a sound I'll never forget. Footsteps, slow, heavy ones, coming up the slope, crunching through draughts, needles and leaves. Whoever, or whatever it was, didn't have a light. I could only hear it. Step by step, I whispered to myself, it's an animal, a deer, just a deer. But deer don't walk upright. The steps stopped maybe 10 yards from my tent. I didn't breathe, didn't move. I could feel the blood pounding in my ears. The silence stretched, long enough that I almost thought I'd imagined it. Then came the sound of stone again, but this time, not tapping, placing, like someone setting rocks down carefully, one after another. I lay there in the dark, gripping the handle of my knife, too afraid to unzip the tent. The sound went on for a minute, then nothing, just the wind again. I stayed awake till dawn, staring at the nylon wall in front of my face, waiting for something else to happen. When I finally crawled out of the tent that morning, I thought maybe it would all seem stupid in daylight, like the woods had just played tricks on me. But then I saw it, right beside my sleeping bag, half a foot from where my head had been. Someone had stacked stones, not just a pile, a shape. The stones formed a human silhouette, flat on the ground, head, shoulders, arms stretched out. The rocks were smooth, perfectly balanced, like they'd been placed by someone patient, each one damp with morning dew. I don't know how long I stood there. My brain kept trying to make sense of it. Maybe it fell from somewhere, or I did it myself, half asleep. But there was no denying it. The stones had been arranged around me. That's when I saw the footprints. They weren't mine. Heavy, boot-shaped, stamped deep into the soil all around the tent. Some circling,
some leading down toward the creek bed, and next to the last print, 2 smaller ones, bare feet. The prints were wet. There hadn't been rain in 2 days. I didn't pack carefully. I threw everything into my bag, barely bothering to roll the tent. The forest was too quiet again, not peaceful quiet, but the kind that feels like it's waiting. When I reached the trail, the cairns were still there, but one had been knocked over. The stones lay scattered across the path, like someone had kicked them apart in anger. As I passed, I noticed something strange. The remaining cairns, the 3 still standing, were no longer just simple stacks. Each one now had a single flat stone balanced upright, at the top, facing east, like they'd been turned overnight. I don't know why, but I felt this overwhelming urge to leave them alone, to not touch or move a thing. I started hiking out as fast as I could, trying not to look back. But the whole way down, I swear I heard it behind me, faint, following from somewhere just beyond the trees. Clack, clack, clack. It never got closer, never faded, either, just stayed there, matching my pace. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw my truck parked on the gravel turnout, I nearly ran. The last 50 yards, I threw my pack in the bed, jumped in, and peeled out. As the road curved along the ridge, I caught one last glimpse of the woods in my rearview mirror. The fog had rolled in again, thick and low, swallowing the trail entrance completely. But just before the trees disappeared from view, I thought I saw something standing at the edge, still, gray, hard to make out in the mist. It wasn't moving. It wasn't human-shaped, exactly. More like a stack, tall, unnatural, balanced too perfectly to be an accident. A cairn. And it looked taller than the others. I didn't sleep that night when I got home. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it. That faint clicking sound, sometimes distant, sometimes close. A few weeks later, I looked up cairn markings online, symbols hikers used for direction, or memorials. None of them matched what I'd seen. And the strangest thing, the spot where I camped doesn't show up on the new maps anymore. The Forest Service blocked that ridge off last year after a mudslide, supposedly. But sometimes, late at night, when it's quiet, I'll catch that sound again, soft and patient, like stone, being stacked carefully in the dark. Clack, clack, clack. And when I do, I can't help but wonder if somewhere out there, above Klingman's dome, there's another cairn now, a 5th one. I didn't go back for almost a year. After that trip, I told myself I'd had a breakdown, sleep deprivation, stress, mountain paranoia, whatever you want to call it. The kind of fear that festers in silence until it starts to invent things. I boxed up my camping gear and shoved it into the attic. Told my friends I was taking a break, but time does what it always does, dulls the edges. And by the next fall, I'd started to feel stupid for being scared of rocks. I convinced myself that whoever built those cairns was just some backwoods prankster or old hermit with too much time. That's how I ended up back there. It wasn't supposed to be a full trip, just a day hike. I wanted to see that ridge one more time before winter, to prove to myself it was normal, that I was normal. The weather was perfect that morning, crisp air, clear sky, the kind that makes the colors of the leaves almost glow. But the park at the visitor center didn't show my route anymore. The ranger I asked said, that section's closed now, erosion and safety issues. When I pressed him for details, he just shrugged. You can still head out toward Andrews Bald, just don't cross the south fence line. I told him I wouldn't. I lied. By noon, I'd slipped through a gap in the fence and was cutting through the same stretch of forest I remembered. The ground felt different, softer somehow, like the soil never quite dried out. The air was thicker too, almost metallic. When I reached the old ridge trail, I knew I was close. The trees opened up, the same slant of light falling through, the semi-heavy quiet pressing down, and there, right where the path bent toward the creek bed, I saw them, the cairns, but not 4 this time. There were 5, each one taller than before, neater, straighter. The top stones glinted in the weak sunlight, like they'd been freshly washed. The sight of them made my stomach twist. I should have turned back right then, but curiosity's a dangerous thing in the mountains. It whispers to you, "You've come this far, mother. I'd as well see." The clearing where I'd camped was just ahead. I recognized the dip in the ground where my tent had been, though it was overgrown now, a tangle of moss and thin saplings, pushing up through the old soil. But something else was there too, a circle of stones, about 6 feet wide, laid out perfectly flat in the center of the clearing. Each rock was smooth and gray, just like before, and in the middle of the circle was a pile of ash. My stomach went cold. It wasn't a campfire. The ashes were too fine, too gray, not charred wood, something else. I stepped closer, and my boot hit something solid under the leaves. When I brushed the debris aside, I froze. It was a fragment of fabric, nylon, torn, faded red. My tent had been red. I don't remember hearing footsteps. 1 second I was crouched there, staring at the ash. The next there was a faint click, the unmistakable sound of stone hitting stone. Then again, clack. Then again, clack. It was close. I turned toward the sound, my breath catching. The forest beyond the clearing looked normal, just pines and fog curling low between trunks, but I could feel it. That same pressure I'd felt before, the sense that someone was standing just beyond what I could see. "Hello," my voice cracked in the stillness. Nothing. Then from somewhere near the creek bed, clack, clack, clack. I started backing away, my boots crunching over dead needles. The fog thickened, and for a second I thought I saw movement, a flicker of gray between trees. The sound grew louder, faster, like someone working with both hands now, stacking, rearranging. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I reached the ridge, until I could see the faint shimmer of my truck down below through the break in the trees. My lungs burned, and my hands were shaking so bad I could barely keep my flashlight steady. I told myself not to look back, but I did. Through the fog, just beyond the bend in the trail, I saw something standing tall and thin, too tall to be a cairn, too straight to be a person. Then it moved, just slightly, a shift of balance, like a tower of stones finding equilibrium. Clack. That single sound echoed down the hollow, and suddenly the others answered. All around me, from the trees, the creek, the ridge, came the chorus of stone against stone. Dozens of them, slow, deliberate, in rhythm. I bolted downhill. Branches tore at my sleeves. Roots caught my boots, but I didn't care. Every few seconds I'd hear one clack, closer than before. To my right, to my left, above me. The sound followed like a heartbeat. When I finally burst onto the gravel turnout where I'd parked, the noise stopped. Dead silence. I fumbled my keys, jumped in the truck, and turned the ignition. As the headlights cut through the fog, I saw something glinting at the edge of the turnout. A single stone, smooth and round, sitting upright on the asphalt. When I reversed, my tires knocked it over. I drove for hours without stopping, past Gatlinburg, through Pigeon Forge, all the way down toward Asheville. I didn't check my phone, didn't eat, didn't even stop for gas until I was running on fumes. By the time I got home, the sky was gray again, that same heavy color from the ridge. I thought maybe I could put it behind me, forget it. But 3 days later, when I walked out to my driveway one morning, I saw something that made me drop my coffee. There, at the edge of my yard, next to the mailbox, were 3 small cairns, perfectly built. The stones were smooth and gray, and there was a 4th, half-built, sitting just a few feet closer to the house. I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? My neighbor probably thought it was kids messing around. I knocked them over with a shovel and tossed the stones into the ditch. The next morning, they were back. Same spot, same height, same careful balance. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I started to drift off, I'd hear something faint, a soft clack from somewhere outside. After 3 nights of that, I snapped. I packed my essentials and left town, rented a small place near Waynesville, changed jobs, changed numbers. I figured if it was some local creep, that'd be the end of it. For a while, it was. Then last winter, I went out to get firewood from the shed behind my rental. It was just after dark, the air cold enough to sting. I'd almost made it back to the porch when I heard it again. Cluck, cluck, cluck. It was coming from the woods behind the property, faint but steady. When I turned my flashlight that way, the beam caught something pale between the trees. A line of stones, 4 of them, stacked neatly, stretching deeper into the woods, like a trail. That night, I didn't call the police. I just sat in the dark, every light off, knife on the table beside me. I must have dozed off at some point, because I woke up to sunlight leaking through the curtains. When I went outside, the cairns were gone, but the gravel on my porch was disturbed. The stones had been rearranged into a rough outline, a shape of a person, arms spread, head tilted slightly to the side, just like before, right where I'd been sleeping. I've moved twice since then. Different states, different phone, different name on the lease. Doesn't matter, because no matter where I go, it finds me. Sometimes, I'll be walking in a park, or stopping at a rest area off the interstate, and I'll see them. Small stacks of smooth gray stones, always 4 or 5, always too neatly made to be chance. And at night, when the house is quiet, I still hear it, soft at first, then steady, like someone patient, working with care. Cluck, cluck, cluck. I haven't been back to Cleanman Stone since. I won't, but I know this much. Somewhere up there, beyond the ridge in the fog, the stones are still waiting. And someday soon, there'll be another cairn, one with my name under it.